Good afternoon and happy Friday to everyone who is watching on Facebook as well as on the Zoom. I'm Sarisa Richardson. I am one of the business coaches at the Wise Women's Business Center, where we are dedicated and committed to helping women in Central New York, women entrepreneurs in Central New York through services, namely our one-on-one business coaching, as well as free workshops available to entrepreneurs in this area. I'm really excited for today's Power Hour because we're covering an extremely just very dynamic conversation about HR and all of your hiring needs, things that you should know as an employer and as an entrepreneur. So with us today, we have Casey and Rachel from One Group, from the HR department in One Group. So I'm really excited to have their expertise. And I'm just going to give them a little bit of the floor so that they can introduce themselves and a little bit about what One Group does.
Sure. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us and for allowing us to participate in this discussion. We really appreciate it. I'm Casey Cohn. I work in the HR consulting area of One Group, and I've been with One Group for just over 10 years now. And I've been in the HR consulting capacity ever since I joined 10 short years ago. But we assist our clients with a variety of their HR needs. We assist all sizes, all industries, and really help with the spectrum of HR services. So whether that be recruitment and how to attract and retain talent and onboarding and, all the way through to, really the full life cycle of an employee. So prior to consulting, I was an internal HR manager. So I have, lived, that life of the internal HR world and, approach our engagements with really just trying to help and give practical solutions and be a resource. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Wisely. I've been at One Group for over 3 years now, and I'm working really closely with Casey on a lot of HR projects with our clients, everything and anything related to HR. I'm so happy to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, Sarisa, I think you're on mute.
Thanks for letting me know that, Casey. So talking about small business human resources compliance, I think it might be a great transition to jump right in and talk about the one thing that changed as a result of last year, which are the COVID-19 rules, labor rules. So why don't you give us a summary of those? And then I've just been looking through my talking points. And before we start talking, I really just want to lay a bit of ground rules for those of you who are watching on Facebook and joining us via Zoom. Please feel free to leave comments in the chat. We love them and we plan to answer them. We want this to be a dynamic conversation. So with that, Casey, let's get started. How about these COVID-19 labor regulations?
All right. How about these regulations? Let's start there. That's a great starting point. And it has been for everyone, quite the year, last 15 months or so, with everything that has happened within the work environment. Plus, of course, the entire world, really. But what's specific to the work environment, Rachel and I have really focused on and spent a lot of time researching and staying up to date as best we can on all the ever evolving and continue to evolve all of these COVID related laws. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means for New York employers now, as things have changed so much within the last 15 months or so, and again, continue to evolve. But really, what is important to remember now, if you're a New York employer, there is the COVID-19 leave that's in play. And so that is separate from New York State paid sick and safe leave. It's its own bucket specifically related to COVID-19. And there was federal laws, and those have since expired. Employers can choose to continue to voluntarily have those laws in place, but as those expired at the end of the year, we'll focus more on what's in place now with the New York COVID paid leave. There's no expiration date to that. So as of right now, it's in effect forever until we hear otherwise. And really what the benefit is for, kind of two buckets, if we think about it that way, but really if an employee is on their own order of quarantine or order of isolation issued by, a government agency or, an official order of quarantine, there's benefits for them. And then if the employee has to care for a minor dependent child who's under their own order of quarantine, and there's some benefits there. So thinking about that in two buckets. So what that means is if the benefits depend on the employer size. And so in New York, they like to carve out different classes of employers and size and income to determine what those benefits are. So for a small business with 10 or fewer employees and an annual income of less than $1 million, there's job protection for the duration of that quarantine leave for the employee for their own quarantine order. And the employee can access benefits to pay for that leave through paid family leave and disability. So those coverages that private New York employers are already required to provide. For a medium size, so 11 to 99 employees or 1 to 10 employees with an annual net income of greater than $1 million, again, job protection for the duration of the quarantine order and at least 5 days of paid sick leave. And if the employee remains on the quarantine order for longer than that, then they would be able to access the benefits through paid family leave and disability. And then it goes from there as far as large businesses and public employers. So a little bit different buckets depending on the size and the income for the employers determine what is available to the employees. But essentially it's job protection and some form of paid leave, whether it's provided through the employer or a combination of the paid family leave and disability benefits. For the quarantine order for the minor dependent child, that is accessed through the paid family leave benefit. So if an employee is otherwise eligible for the paid family leave benefit, and they have that situation arise, they would apply for benefits that way. So that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But hopefully that
So
helps answer that question.
No, Casey, that really helped provide a high level of what the benefits are and then really how they apply to us as small business owners, right? So the main, or just business owners in general, because like you mentioned, there's different tiers to business ownership as it is defined in New York State. So it's very helpful to know, like, if as an employer, what this means to me. So essentially it means if one of my employees has to quarantine or get sick or whatever due to COVID, I essentially, they are safe in their job. I keep their job during the quarantine, and we're not allowed to eliminate that position as a result of that.
Correct. And what I would say too, with any of these, really with the majority of these topics that we'll be talking about, to rely on your partner. So if you're a business owner that finds yourself in these different situations as things arise, as they do, of course, throughout the course of having employees, rely on your partner. So with this, because it involves paid family leave, disability, potentially depending on the situation, rely on your benefits partner. If you do have an HR consulting partner or some sort of, partner that provides HR services, rely on them. We like to, you all need to focus on running your business. And so I always encourage you to, rely on partners that can help. So again, in this situation, because it could potentially involve the paid family leave and disability benefits, ask your benefits partner and they can help as well through those situations as far as perhaps, what forms do we complete? How do we file the claim? That type of thing. And know that you have resources available to you.
Yeah. And that's one thing as a business owner, I'm always, encouraging other business owners to do is tap into their resources, right? There are so many of them available to us, paid resources as well as unpaid and in-kind resources. When we're talking about HR and benefits partners, if someone was a business owner evaluating an HR and benefits partner, what are some things that you think that they should be considering while they're looking for these type of partners?
Great question. What I would say is, service. What type of service is that partner going to provide in relationship to your needs? Because everyone's needs are different. Companies are evolving, needs are evolving, laws are evolving, trends are evolving. And so I think it's really important to look for a partner that would help be able to provide, be really service oriented and be able to assist as those needs arise. And so there's different levels of partnerships and everyone again has different needs. Some folks, enjoy researching on their own or like reading different pieces of information. Others, really want to have that partnership of, okay, what do I need to do? Let's break it down. Here's what's going on. Let's strategize on how to go from there. So I think the level of service, the level of expertise that your partner can provide, can go a long way with determining if it's the right fit for you.
And I always want to be cognizant that we may have some new business owners on the call. Maybe can you give us a high level of some of the services that an HR business partner might offer? And I know One Group is, provides those services as well. It might help to provide sort of like a high level overview of some of the things that we as business owners could be reaching out to these HR business partners to help with.
Sure. Great question. And so I can speak, personally, just from our experience at One Group and the type of services that we offer. But so, for example, we really try to be a true partner to our clients. And so, and have that relationship where we understand their business, understand, where they are, where they want to go with that business, and really help them from, and I'm sorry, I keep saying the word buckets, but two main buckets. So we focus on compliance and we focus on best practice. And so what's compliant? That's certainly a really essential part to having employees and making sure that rules and regulations are followed and enacted as they, as appropriate, as applicable, but then also best practice. So something might be compliant, but there might be another way to achieve the goal that the company's trying to achieve. So it's really helpful to understand that and to be able to strategize and understand what's the company's philosophy regarding XYZ, and then to again have that true partnership to build upon that strategy and then implement things as it makes sense and that fits within that strategy. So services that we offer really, again, run the gamut as far as HR services. We can help with recruiting. So we act as an extension of the HR team and can help with recruiting questions, or actually, recruit for the positions, to different leaves that come into play, or even, what's the new hire paperwork? What's required when someone comes on board? Take care of that onboarding piece. Performance management. What does that mean? What does that look like? How can we create a performance management system and evaluate employees and give the employees the recognition and feedback that they want and that they deserve, as far as that goes, and really benefits philosophy, compensation strategies. Sometimes, sometimes there's unfortunate changes, such as a layoff might need to occur, or separations, and we can help provide guidance on those pieces as well.
Excellent. Yeah, that was a really nice high level. Really appreciate that. One of the other topics that I'm just, so folks, if you are on the Facebook or on Zoom, please, again, feel free to leave your comments, because I have my questions, right, Casey? And I'm happy to use all of this time going through some of the talking points and questions that I had related to this topic. So one of the questions that I get a lot from my clients as a business coach is, what is the difference between interns, contractors, 1099 contractors, and an actual employee? Like, what is that gray line between when I have to actually turn on the payroll for a formal and form a formal employee relationship?
That's a really great question, and definitely a area that we encounter a lot, especially as new business owners are trying to determine their staffing needs and what does that look like, and what are we going to do, and where are we going to go from here. And so I am so glad you brought that up. Really, when it comes down to it, with independent contractors versus employees, there's not a clear-cut definition as to, oh, this is X, this is Y. So it's really important to understand the different dynamics of what could create that employment relationship. And really, it comes down to different court cases that have happened throughout the years to determine that relationship. A lot of the common law tests is what they're called. So a lot of the things that matter or that come into play is that independent contractor in business for themselves? And are they able to make their services available to the public? Does that employer have control over them, or supervise them, or give direction? And so essentially, what does that mean? So some of the things that When looking at that, you want to determine, do we have an employer-employee relationship, or do we have a true independent contractor type of arrangement? And so some of the things that come into play with regards to trying to determine that is, for example, is full-time work required? Is someone working 40 hours a week? That tends to fall more under the employee category than an independent contractor. Are there set work hours? Is there required attendance at meetings or trainings? Is permission required when someone's going to be absent? Is there any direct supervision to the job? Is there, who sets the rate of pay? Is it the independent contractor saying this is my rate, or is it the employer saying this is how we're going to pay you, and more of a salary type of or hourly type of arrangement? Again, that tends to fall more on the employer side. So there's a whole range of factors that can help determine that employer-employee relationship. So again, a lot of it comes down to that control, direction, supervision, how much of that is present. And if it is present, then it tends to fall in that employee-employer relationship. So to try to simplify, it's not a simple answer as far as there's no, again, clear-cut definition, but there is several factors and criteria that someone should evaluate their specific situation to determine, what is the appropriate arrangement.
And we're going into summer, which means it's intern season. And so a lot of small businesses really benefit from utilizing interns as a tool and as a low cost or no cost tool for their business during the summer. And I have no judgment towards that, but I think it's worth discussing because New York State really does have clear-cut guidelines as to what defines an intern and what defines an internship. So maybe why don't we talk about that specifically for some of our small business owners who might be hiring interns this summer?
Sure, absolutely. And there's great point. And there's such a, I think a great benefit to having interns and allowing those folks to experience what it's like to work in your workplace and to learn different tasks and to be trained and to get them into the workforce. But absolutely, there are very specific criteria when it comes to determining a paid versus unpaid internship and what that looks like. So what I'm going to focus on is the for-profit businesses with regards to paid versus unpaid internships. There's a whole other set of criteria for non-for-profit, but we'll focus on the for-profit today. With that, New York State, well, I backtrack a little bit. So to determine if you can have an unpaid versus a paid internship, the Department of Labor, the US Department of Labor, has 6 criteria that they've issued. New York State took that criteria, those 6, and then added 5 more. So there's 11 pieces of criteria that it's important to be aware of.
That is
when
not
determining
at all, Casey.
It's all easy stuff. But when to determine if an intern needs to be paid. So, similar to we'll table the independent contractor discussion. But so for-profit businesses in New York, to determine whether an internship can be paid or unpaid, again, there's 11 criteria that an employer can look at to determine how to appropriately determine that. So
I'm
some of the
a checklist, Casey. Is it that simple that it's like check, 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 or is there some gray?
There's not too much gray. It's a fact sheet that New York puts out that outlines that criteria. So it's pretty clear as far as, but there's always some gray. So we can't eliminate the gray area. But essentially, when looking at that, some of the things that come into play are the extent of the internship. So, is the training, specific to the employer's organization and to a specific job, or is it more broad and more educational that, can the employee take those skills and transfer them elsewhere pretty easily? Is the training for the benefit of the intern? So if the training's for the benefit of the intern, that can, help determine that appropriate relationship. And I should say that for those 11 criteria, all of that criteria has to be met. So it's important that if you, in the checklist, version, to make sure you can check off each of those 11 boxes. Mm-hmm. Another piece to consider, does the intern displace a regular employee? Or is it really, a unique internship to the organization? And do they work under close supervision? Another one is, do the activities of the employee provide a benefit to the employer? Because that's something to consider, where really an unpaid internship to be considered unpaid, it shouldn't be an immediate impact or immediate benefit to the employer. And in some cases, it can impede the business operations because it's a true learning opportunity. So those are some factors to consider as well. And as I mentioned, is the training general? Can the intern easily take that information elsewhere, transfer those skills, or is it really specific to the organization? There's different notification requirements as part of this criteria too. What did they receive in writing? Is there any expectation of benefits? Is there any expectation to have a job when the internship is complete? So all of that, those factors are very relevant and important to sort through when determining whether to pay an intern or if they do qualify for an unpaid internship.
Yeah, so
See,
that's
clear,
very helpful.
clear as mud.
It's actually very, very clear to me, and I welcome comments again from the group, but it's really helpful because this concept of that interns are like free employees that can provide help is really not true, and it's also
Correct.
dangerous to think that way as a business owner in terms of New York State compliance and Department of Labor compliance, right? Like you just mentioned.
Correct.
So I highly encourage going on to the New York State. Where did you say that not checklist, but those guidelines were listed?
Yeah. Great. The fact sheet is, and I like checklists, so we'll call it a checklist, but that's available right on the New York State Department of Labor website. So there's a whole section for internships. There's a for-profit and a not-for-profit section. And so the criteria is right on there. And again, being in New York, it's so important to always remember there's the US guidelines from the US, Department of Labor, but then New York State has their own, of course, as each state does, their version of the Department of Labor. And so you want to make sure that it complies with all of the regulations. And so the New York State fact sheet that's available on the New York State Department of Labor website has, those 11 criteria listed right there.
Very helpful to hear and know of. Talking about hiring, Casey or Rachel, would you ladies, based on your experience, have any tips on how to define roles for your company when you're ready, and then also how to post those roles and identify and hire talent?
Yeah, great question. And so really with defining the roles, an employer wants to determine, okay, where, what is the need for the role, and let's try to create this role. And it can be tricky, especially starting out in a new business. A lot of times employees and owners, of course, wear many, many, many hats because there's so much to be done. And so as businesses grow and evolve, sometimes I think owners' hats always have, all of those hats, but the employees' roles shift and evolve over time as the business does. That's just the course of it. So it's really important to define what the needs are, for that role, and try to be as clear as possible with the expectations. And sometimes it's, a variety of things. It doesn't mean that the job has to be narrow in scope, but to really want to understand and set those expectations. And even if it's, this, position has a bunch of different, requirements or whatever the situation might be, but just to be clear when trying to illustrate that, communicate that to applicants and candidates and going through the interview process, so that the candidates know what they're potentially signing on for, and that and so that is, I think, to be as clear as possible as far as expectations, whatever those expectations might be, is really helpful and goes a long way to set that tone from the get-go with the employment relationship. And so, for example, expectations, could it be, are weekends involved, are nights involved, is travel involved, is there, what are the basic, requirements that's needed for the position? And so I think to clearly define those, and again, then to clearly communicate those out throughout the process is really beneficial. As far as posting sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that was actually where I was going to go. Do you have any advice on tips or tools or avenues that can be used to post a position?
Yeah, so there's so many avenues out there that are available to post positions. And Rachel, I welcome your input on this as well, as I know you help our clients post a variety of positions on a variety of different resources. But there's so many tools out there as far as what's available online. So we see a lot through, and again, it depends on the position, the industry, what you're looking for. We see positions posted on LinkedIn. We see, positions posted on Indeed. That seems to be a hub where a lot of folks go. And we're not advocating one versus the other. It really depends on the needs or the role of what you're looking for. But there's a variety of places. Rachel, do you have additional sources for posting that you would recommend?
No additional sources that I typically see, but I would say for LinkedIn, those are more typically the professional or management type roles. We see those a little bit more frequently on LinkedIn versus Indeed. But yeah, that's really it.
Yeah, and it's thank you, Rachel. And I think too, when posting, it's important to give a little blurb about the company, give some background about the job, again, the essential requirements, and just have it in there as far as your ad or post. We like to call them your job posting, again, just to give the candidate or applicants some background to the company, background to the job, the requirements, what they can anticipate. Those types of features I think are really helpful as folks are performing their search. And contact information, can't emphasize contact information enough, but just to make sure that the contact information is correct, that they, have a way, an avenue to get to someone. And sometimes there's, online postings aren't the only option. I shouldn't say sometimes, they're not the only option. And so, to be prepared if someone has a storefront that someone walks in and asks about a job, and there's, have an application available, or have, never want to miss out on a potential candidate that could really, that might be a great fit for your organization. So to not only, you have to go online. Well, sometimes that doesn't work for everybody. So to be able to reach out to folks in a variety of areas, be ready if they walk in your storefront, I think can be helpful too.
Awesome. So again, folks, if you're just joining, I am on the call with Casey and Rachel, who are professionals at One Group, and we're talking about small business HR compliance. I'm wondering, Casey, why don't we backtrack a little bit? And would you mind talking or giving us a high level overview of some compliance things and employer responsibilities that we should be considering as small business owners once we get to the point when we are ready now to hire a new employee or our first employee, or some of us may have employees and may just want to make sure we are doing things right in terms of compliance and our responsibilities?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of compliance components it's important to be aware of when having employees or anticipating bringing someone on board. So I'll break it up into two different sections. We'll talk about some compliance components, and then I'll turn it over to Rachel to talk about the new hire paperwork component and some of the posters and things like that are involved. So with regards to and we'll go high level as far as the compliance components, but things to keep in mind, when bringing on a new employee in New York, it's important to have the right insurance coverages in place that you need for those folks. So for example, your New York State disability benefit. And so there's, I think, 5 states plus Puerto Rico that require a state provided disability benefit, New York being one of those. And what it is, it's a wage replacement for off the job injuries, and it provides a max benefit currently of $170 per week. And so that's a New York State disability benefit that you would want to partner with a benefits consultant or provider to assist with obtaining that coverage. As a rider to that benefit, there's the paid family leave component, which is also New York State, required for private employers with 1 or more employees. And that benefit, where the disability is for your employee's own injury or illness, the paid family leave benefit is for an employee to care for a family member with a serious illness, for baby bonding purposes, or if they have a family member who's going to go on active military duty, there's that component as well. It's important to have that coverage in place along with your workers' comp coverage, which is your on-the-job injury or illness that could occur on the job. And again, there's a separate workers' comp insurance policy for that an employer would pay into. And have that coverage in place. And then making sure too, your unemployment insurance, that you're registered for that, and have that coverage set for you. So some coverage pieces that it's important to have in place when you're thinking about hiring on those employees. Some other things to consider are with New York State, you have your sexual harassment prevention requirements. So that requires to have a policy in place, to have training available upon hire and annually thereafter. And so during those different, whether it's upon hire and then annual, employees need to be provided with their policy, with the training materials, and notice of where to find those items. And then again, actually go through the training. That needs to be, it's important to track that and have record of that. And so that's the sexual harassment prevention piece. And it's also New York State recently enacted the New York State paid sick leave law, where earlier we were talking about the COVID paid leave. This is completely separate from the New York State paid sick and safe leave law, which impacts all private employers in New York as well with employees. So that benefit, similar to the COVID paid leave, depends on size, income, as far as what's required, but that's an important benefit to be aware of, is that's new. That started in January of this year, and actually September of last year, but really went into effect so employees could use the time beginning in January. So those are some compliance pieces to be aware of. I'll turn it over to Rachel to talk about some of the different forms and things of that nature that are required when someone comes on board.
Thanks, Casey. I'll just quickly go over the federal and New York new hire forms. There are a few, so I'll just run through them quickly. First, I'll start with New York since there's a few more. First, when you hire an employee, each employee should be provided with a wage acknowledgement form. So this is under New York's Wage Theft Prevention Act, and it really just provides notice to them of their pay, information about the employer, their payday, things like that. So they are required to sign that. And that can be found right on the New York Department of Labor website. And then also under New York State, as Casey mentioned, there are those sexual harassment prevention documents that need to be given to new hires. And those can be, the sample documents can be found right on the DOL website as well. And then also in New York, there is a required tax form that employees must fill out, just the employee withholding document, and that can be found on the New York tax website. And then over to the federal side, there's also a federal withholding form for taxes that can be found on the federal tax website. And then probably the biggest one is the Form I-9 that's under the federal law as well. And that really is a big document that just identifies the employee's eligibility to work in the US. So you want to make sure to complete that for all employees. That's that document where they have to bring in either their driver's license or passport, something like that, to verify their eligibility to work. So you'd want to have that as well. And that can be found on uscis.gov. And there's also some best practice documents for new hires that we would recommend having a direct deposit form filled out, employee information sheet, just with some emergency contact information, things like that. And also any benefits information or notices if they're eligible for benefits. So that's for the new hires. And then I can jump into quickly required posters under federal and New York State. So they both have some required posters. Most can be found right on the Department of Labor website, but there are some that can be provided through the insurance carrier. So there's a workers' comp poster, disability, paid family leave. Those can be found typically through your insurance carrier, can get those for you. And also there is an option to work with a poster vendor. Those would typically come with a fee to provide those posters for your company, and versus going to the website, and those would be free of charge. So that is a high level overview.
Thank you so much for that. I'm really appreciating all of the content we're getting today. It's just so helpful. I just want to pause and see if there are any questions that has come in on Facebook. And I'm just going to check our chat as well. So I don't see any questions in the chat. Excellent. So moving on to competitive pay. So a lot of small business employers we talked about posting roles, defining roles, how to be compliant once you do have an employee. Now, when you do hire, or when you do send out sort of that offer letter, there's a lot of discussion on how to stay competitive in this very competitive market right now. So it's actually a very competitive employee market right now, hiring market. So do you have any tips on crafting a competitive offer for a particular small business or a particular industry, and how to determine some of the benefits that we may want to offer to those employees?
Yes, absolutely. And you're so right as far as such a competitive labor market right now. It's everyone's looking for great talent and to fit their organization, and it's very competitive. And so I think it's important for employers to determine what is their philosophy when it comes to compensation strategy, benefit strategy. What is their philosophy as far as what they can and want to offer employees as far as pay and benefits, because they really go hand in hand. I think even pre-pandemic time, the rate of pay is certainly important for folks, or but also what are the benefits, what's offered to them. A lot of folks are looking for health insurance. A lot of folks are looking for that paid time off package or flexibility or remote work. Again, even pre-pandemic, remote work was in some senses a really great benefit for individuals, not for everyone, but and depending on the work setting, it's not a fit for everyone, but that's it's still something to consider, that or that leads to that work-life balance. What type of time off or flexibility, or do we offer flexible start-stop times as long as folks are here within their core hours? Those types of things. It really comes into play as far as what is the employer's approach, and so that philosophy goes a long way as far as to determining what is competitive for them to try to attract and retain that talent. Because, I say attract and retain because not only do we want to attract those candidates to come work for you, we want to retain them once they're there. And so, so they really go hand in hand as far as that benefits, that overall benefits package that compensation is certainly a part of. And so carving out compensation a little bit, we can talk about that, and really the philosophy that employers should think about when it comes to compensation is, do they want to exceed the market, so they're paying above market? Do they want to meet the market where they're paying, about average for the type of position, or lag the market where they're paying a little bit behind? And there's different reasons for all three as far as what makes the most sense for that employer. And so once they're determining what their philosophy is, that can help then streamline or create wage bands or that salary structure for those jobs. And so as far as market data to determine that information, a lot of times employers, there's a ton of salary surveys out there, and so those are available typically at a cost. There are some free ones available. I caution on those just because I think it's important to remember overall, when comparing salary and determining what's competitive, to remember, kind of apples to apples. So what's the industry, what's the size, what's the location, what's the experience required for that role? All of those things come into play. So, a Google, salary search of, oh, this is what X makes, doesn't always really equate to determining if that is appropriate for your organization, for your position. So there are certainly surveys that are available to purchase that can help. And again, keeping in mind though, a job title, using HR as an example, a HR manager at 5 different companies might have 5 different roles. And so just using titles doesn't always, it typically does not help with determining, okay, that's the right pay. So it's really looking at job duties and function, and industry. Location is certainly significant there as well. So that's the salary component. The benefits, there's so many things to consider with benefits, and it really can be exciting to think about and to strategize about as far as really, what is the company's philosophy on benefits. Again, as I mentioned, even pre-pandemic, a lot of times when we are involved in different recruitment discussions, or once an offer has been made, a lot of times employees will try to negotiate, paid time off benefits. It's not just pay. Pay, again, certainly important, but it's that whole other benefits package that's really meaningful to folks. And everyone has different needs, but what we've seen a lot within the last several years, certainly within the last year or so, is flexibility. And so, as I mentioned, some of those options earlier, but does my potential employer have flexible start-stop times? Again, everyone has different needs, or works better, or later, earlier, what have you. It's not an option for every employer, depending on the industry and the position, of course. But are there core hours, or as long as someone works those core hours, if they come in early or stay later, that's fine. So that's something to consider as well. I think folks also look for advancement. People want to know, or many employees want to know, is there room for growth, and what would that look like? And so I think that's important too. And again, we might not always know if we're bringing on just a few employees to begin and it's a new company, but is there potential for growth? Is there advancement opportunities? What do those look like? When we talk about the retention piece, so the attracting and retaining employees, things to consider there too. Employees, as I mentioned earlier, need and deserve recognition, that feedback. And so positive, negative, to have, what's the strategy for performance evaluations? Are there any? Is it is there on the spot feedback provided and recognition? Are there employee recognition programs or events, or is lunch brought in every so often to acknowledge the hard work that employees are doing, or a company picnic, or different things like that? And again, it's different based on needs and interests of folks, but the recognition piece is really important too. So all of that, so that's a lot, but all of that I think is important for employers to keep in mind as they're trying to determine what is their philosophy, what's their approach. We talk about exceed the market, meet the market, or lag the market as far as compensation. And then when I talked about, there's different things to think about. Maybe we're going to pay employees, a higher salary because we don't have that benefit package, or maybe we're going to meet the market and we're going to offer a really rich benefit package, or maybe we're going to lag the market and we really want to promote employee growth and development and have develop people from within. Lag the market might not always be the best option for folks, but there's different philosophies that come into play, and certainly compensation and that whole benefits package go hand in hand.
Very, very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you, Casey. Another area that I get a lot of questions on from some of my clients that I coach is breaks and work hours. So essentially, what is is there a max number of hours that an employee can work before an employer should start to consider adding another shift and adding on employees?
Great question. So we also get a lot of questions on breaks and meal periods, and what does that look like, and what does that mean? So I think to go backwards a little bit, we'll talk about the basics with New York. So what New York says is there's no required break periods. So an employer does not have to provide breaks. A lot of times employers do that 10-minute or 15-minute break, between meal periods or what have you, depending on the shift. That's an option. What New York says is if you do provide a 10 or 15-minute break, it should be paid, but you don't have to, offer that break period. Lunch periods come into play for New York, and with most industries. There's some other industry specifics with regards to meal periods, but generally speaking, once an employee works more than 6 hours within a shift, they are entitled to at least a 30-minute unpaid meal period. So employers might choose to pay that. Employers might choose to allow an hour, but the requirement is that at least 30 minutes of unpaid time. And when it's unpaid, that means that person should truly be relieved of their work duty. So not have to, answer the phone or what have you, but really be able to take that time for themselves during the workday. As far as shifts, there's some different things that come into play with split shifts or that type of thing. But really, I think what the employer should look at is, also thinking about their philosophy and that whole, strategy of work-life balance or their philosophy for benefits. But, when does it make sense to bring on different, another employee or part-time employees? So I think it's looking at, the hours, the scope of work, what are the requirements, what are the employees, what makes sense? Do we want employees working 60 hours a week, or do we want to try to, is overtime required, but maybe it's more close to 45 hours. It really depends on the situation, but to determine what makes the most sense for them, and again, wanting to retain those good employees that they have, and so not have them spread too thin, or again, there's different philosophies with that.
Yeah, I mean, and one I guess tip or best practice that I have learned recently is that split shift practice. So say you have a storefront or restaurant that's open for 10 hours a day, and you're getting over that 6 hours where you're allowing this employee a 30-minute lunch break, that you may want to consider at that point hiring another employee and splitting those shifts into two. So cool. Well, I, found this very informative for me. I'm trying to go over our talking points to see if I left anything out. We talked about pay and just a little bit of a summary, actually. So we talked about pay, such great tips on that and how to stay competitive and craft a competitive package. We talked about what HR benefit partners can provide and what you should be looking for when you're looking for HR partners. We talked about the COVID-19 leave laws and what they mean to us as employers, as well as some high level compliance and employer responsibilities. Talked about, hours, what it means to hire the different roles, interns and 1099 contract employees, as well as your I-9 employees. We talked about necessary components of onboarding. So I really appreciated hearing some of the compliance aspects as it relates to the sexual harassment training, as well as other parts of that onboarding kit. One thing that I'd love to talk about as we're wrapping up is how unemployment affects us as small business owners. Specifically this year, we've seen a huge impact on how unemployment affects us. So I'd love to hear, Casey or Rachel, your thoughts on that and some things that we should consider as employers.
Sure, and that's a really timely topic, Sarsa, to bring up, because you're right. Unfortunately, there have been such a rise in unemployment claims throughout the last year plus, and also with that, a lot of fraudulent claims that we've seen as well. And so just a lot going on with the whole unemployment system, I suppose, right now. So, it is important to remember, and I'm sure it's small business owners, you all know that it is an experience rated program. And so, yes, rates are impacted based on usage. But with that, I think, how it impacts employers is really, employers are required to pay into the program, quarterly or however they set it up. It's typically they would partner with their payroll provider on that, make sure everything's filed appropriately, because there's different forms and things of that nature. But when someone,
all
I think
of these forms, Casey.
yes, love forms. So, but it's important to, when you get that notice for unemployment, to look at it and to look at it pretty timely. Typically it's a 10-day turnaround time. But when you receive a notice of benefits or someone's claiming benefits, it's important to make sure, is it a fraudulent claim? Is it a valid claim? Are there any, is that person still working for you? Or, did this person ever work for you? So it's important to really look at that form and make sure it's accurate. Typically, if it's accurate, I don't think there's any action required. But if there's something that you need to share or provide, it's important again to return that notice in a timely basis so that it can be filed, and then go through the process with the state. I think with the rise in unemployment claims, what we've seen a lot, and I'm sure many of you small business owners have encountered it as well, but there's quite a backlog of claims. And so it's taking quite an extra amount of time to really review claims and get back to employers and make a determination. So I'd say, unfortunately, that's very common. So if any of you have experienced that, I'd say don't worry, because it's just common. It's where we are right now, or have been, just unfortunately due to the rise of claims that have come up. So that is a common occurrence right now, to have quite a long waiting time to hear back. But I think it's still important to fill out those forms, if needed, but look at them, review them, and submit those if needed, and to follow through. I think it's important too to keep good documentation, as far as your policies, or if you have, unfortunately, if someone is terminated for performance or for conduct issues, that you have good solid documentation and policies regarding that, because that's important to submit along with your paperwork. As far as if it was a policy violation, what's the policy? When did that employee sign off on it? What specifically happened? How are they notified of it? All of that information, that documentation is important to provide with your claim as well. So I think as much factual information as possible, really reviewing those forms, being timely, and then knowing, unfortunately, I think there's quite a bit of backlog with claims due to the current environment that we're in. So to be patient with those, but really to look at those. I think another thing to keep in mind is sometimes we'll get questions of so and so hasn't worked for me in months. Went to work for another employer. Why am I getting a claim? And there's a whole set of rules that New York State goes through with regards to that process. And I won't get into all of those, but it's important to know that sometimes it's within a specific time period. But if an employer provided wages to an employee within a specified time period that they filed the claim, that employer, even if they didn't leave them to then file unemployment, if they were between another employer or two at that time, that employer could still be responsible for a portion of that claim. So that's common as well. And we do see that a lot. So I think, again, to try to summarize, just, make sure you're keeping good, solid documentation, review and submit those forms as needed, and know that, it's unfortunately, again, just due to the volume of claims that there's quite a bit of waiting time to hear back. But I would say with unemployment, with anything that we talked about, as I mentioned earlier, really rely on your partners to help you through those things. I don't think, as a business owner, you're not expected to be an HR expert or, a financial expert or an accounting expert or, benefits expert. There's so many hats that you wear. So, try to, pass on those hats when you can and when it makes sense, to really rely on your payroll provider, your accountant, your HR professional, your benefits partner, your financial advisor, however wherever it's appropriate, just based on the needs, so that you don't have to be the expert in everything, rely on your partners to be those experts for you and to really, help you through these different pieces. And as I talked about, we really focus on what's compliant, but then what's best practice, what's your strategy, what's your philosophy, to really try to understand, and be a partner to help you all, navigate through this interesting, employment environment that we're in. Just, the environment in general, unfortunately, the pandemic has just changed so many things. So just to really rely on your partners.
Very helpful. One last thing, Casey, before we wrap up, when you talk about because we spent majority all of this time on HR compliance and very necessary pieces. You mentioned towards the end, not only thinking about what's compliant, but also thinking about what's best practice. So, and a lot of that is very industry specific and business specific. So if we as business owners are looking for best practices, HR best practices in our specific industries for our businesses, would you have any resources that we could probably look into or that you would like to recommend?
That's a great question. I would say if there's specific industry, best practices that someone is looking for, if there's any sort of organization or association that, you belong to, as far as, based on your industry, that could help navigate through some of those topics. I would say from the HR perspective, if you have an HR partner or, consultant or avenue to submit questions to or bounce ideas off of, to do that. And I think sometimes even, if you have a benefits partner, they might have to be able to provide some different best practices based on, what their clients are doing or just what the industry is doing, from that standpoint. So I would say to really, as I said before, to rely on your partners to see, whether if there's a specific association that you're involved with, because it's industry specific and there's different things that can help you there. I think that's a great avenue. If it's specific to the benefits world or to the HR world or to the, financial world, to rely on your partners there, whether, your consultants in that avenue. to help with what's best practice in the industry. What are employers of, my size and my industry doing that you see, or what are employers in this area doing? I think, those folks that work with a variety of businesses have a good insight as, what folks are doing, what works, what doesn't work, why something that might have worked for one organization or might not have worked, might work for another organization, or vice versa, really just depending on the needs and the makeup and all of that. So there's a lot to go to it, not to overwhelm anyone, but I think really, there's so much information out there. So it's just really tapping into your resources to be able to break it down for you so that you don't have to.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you summarized that. As a business owner, I'd love to share some of the tools that I use for those of you who may be watching. So you had mentioned associations. Absolutely, for any specific industry that you're in, retail, restaurant, service, spas, whatever. Definitely, there are professional associations for each of those industries. Definitely join one of them. It's worth paying into. You get access to other business owners in that industry, and you can share best practices that way. But they also publish really awesome guides. So one of the retail associations that I'm a part of, I use for my employee handbook. Another one is the Glassdoor website. So I like using that to compare salaries, geographically. So there's a great tool where you can put in your zip code, whatever the position is, and you can, like you said, Casey, review the actual job descriptions as it relates to the location. So as you're defining what your roles are within your growing business and posting roles, that's a great tool to use to sort of baseline what others are doing in terms of what roles they're posting and what salaries they're going for, and what benefits they include, because many of them in that Glassdoor will also include the benefits details. And then LinkedIn also shares, I find tons of HR specific guides on there on posting a role. So certain things that you should say within the your posting, whether you're using LinkedIn or Indeed or even Facebook. There are a lot of sort of technical or best practice guides that you can follow as a business owner when you're ready to post those roles. So
all great tips.
Yeah, so this has been a super dynamic conversation, very helpful to me as a business owner, and I hope that has also been helpful for those of you watching. Again, Casey and Rachel, just want to thank you so much for your time and expertise joining us today. Before you go, why don't you let us all know where we can get in touch with you if you at One Group, for those watching who might be interested in some of those services you mentioned.
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to say, thank you, and thank you everyone participating and watching. We certainly enjoyed our discussion this afternoon, and just really, this is what we do. And so we are very passionate about HR and trying to help others navigate through, just what works for them. And again, that compliance and those best practice, your strategy, all of that. So we find a true passion in it. So we thank you and hope that this was helpful to you all, and certainly wish you all the best. So thank you. You're welcome. As far as contact information, you're welcome to reach out to us. We're happy to, talk through these different scenarios that we've talked through today. You can reach me again. My name is Casey Cohn, and you can reach me at ccohn. So it's CCONE at onegroup.com. It's all one word, ONEGROUP.com. And, happy to, again, answer any questions or, hear from you as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.